Tens of thousands of people have marched in cities across the country calling for an end to violence against women.
This is a matter of life and death.
We are murdering our women.
It's a new national plan to eliminate domestic violence within a decade. It is an ambitious plan.
Ambitious hasn't always equalled success.
What we're seeing right now is a huge spike in domestic and family violence.
A 28% increase in intimate partner homicide.
A national crisis.
The system has let down another woman.
Do better.
Katy Gallagher, thank you so much for joining the Daily Oz.
Thanks for having me.
As the Minister of Women, what do you believe is the number one issue facing young women in Australia today?
Well, there's lots of issues, but I think probably the major one is violence, unfortunately, because it impacts on everything else. Violence impacts on your job, your economic well-being, your family, everything.
Your government has committed to ending men's violence against women in the next decade. The data tells us we're going backwards though. Why is that?
Yeah, so in terms of some of the statistics, there's always an issue of when people feel more comfortable about reporting it and pursuing it through the courts, that you would see an increase, because a lot of it, and I'm not trying to say that it's a good result having those numbers increasing, but a lot of violence against women has been secret, but it's still at unacceptable levels.
If we look though at the number of women who have been killed by an intimate partner, that number has increased by nearly 30% in 2023. And that's not a case of, more women coming forward. That's just facts that we have data dating back 30 years. And all the figures show that it is set to increase again this year. Why is that? What is going so wrong?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. The deaths of women in this country, often at the hands of former partners or former intimate partners, is completely unacceptable, and it's horrifying.
But why, even since this national plan has come into effect, it has increased further? Why?
Yeah, well, I would think, I don't know that you could link the two, that the plan has failed or the plan hasn't done what it said it would do, because the plan is about long-term change. And we're seeing the issues of whether it's a woman dying once a week, once every 4 days, that's been around for a lot longer.
Just to be clear though, what is your answer for why it has increased?
Well, I think it's really difficult to, we have always had men killing women in this country, so I think that we've got a level of public scrutiny of it, we've got reporting of it, we've got a much better discussion about what's happening and what led to it. Some of the issues are clearly with the legal system and they need to be resolved, but we've got to look at ways that we can help as well.
I was watching your press club speech from March and you said, quote, "Women in this country don't need another empty promise. They need action and accountability." With men's violence against women increasing despite the government's national plan, isn't that the definition of an empty promise?
Well, I don't think it's an empty promise at all, and the remarks I was making there were really how hard and complex this all is. The reasons why men are violent towards women in this country are complex, and they're not going to be solved with one policy idea. This is stuff that we have to change at primary school. It's attitudes towards women, and we're really determined to try and shift the dial, but we're not pretending it's easy or that it's going to happen overnight.
But with the data showing that it's increasing, isn't that an empty promise?
Well, the national plan's 18 months in. We'll do reports against it to say what we're seeing, and there's work to be done about making sure we're, looking at all of the ways that we can really address this.
You mentioned before that it's a 10-year plan and we are only 18 months in.
Yep.
But that's one of the criticisms of a policy like this, that under this policy it takes a decade. By that time, you likely won't be the Minister for Women. So who will be held to account if we don't meet these targets at the end of these 10 years?
The importance of the national plan is setting those areas of focus. It was heavily consulted upon, the women's sector in particular. It was years of work to try and get there. And then what it means is if I come and go, and politicians do, that you have the national plan, that doesn't change, because the focus has to be on early intervention, prevention, recovery and healing. That's not going to change. If I'm Minister for Women or someone else is, maybe the level of commitment wanes about the priority of it, but it sets the framework, and that's the important thing.
But at the end of the 10 years, I think we're just seeing failure after failure in this space, and you said that women need accountability. If at the end of the 10 years it fails and the government of the day just blames the previous government, no one takes responsibility. And if we can't hold you to account as the Minister for Women, who do we hold to account?
Yeah, look, and I can sense the frustration. I mean, in terms of accountability, it's not waiting to the end of the 10 years. Like, we will be accountable under that plan through the action plans and through our reports. Like, we're not setting it at 18 months ago and then saying, see you in 10 years' time. But we also have to be honest and say, government cannot solve this issue. We don't control the level of violence against women in this country. Our role is to say it shouldn't happen. It's to make sure the legal system is there to support it, and also to support women and children who are experiencing it get out of it. So they are the things, but we are absolutely accountable for it.
At the last election, Labor promised to deliver 500 new domestic violence workers. How many has it delivered to date?
Look, I don't have the latest figure on that. I know by the end of June, Amanda Rishworth, who has responsibility for this in the government, has undertakings from the states and territories where we would have more than half of those positions filled. But
Amanda Rishworth said, though, about 2 months ago that it was at 17. Is that right?
Yes. So if I take a step back, we're providing the funding for that, but the funding goes through the states and territories, and they do the employment. So
but Labor knew that when it made this promise.
Yeah, and we thought it would be a much more straightforward process than it's been. So
is
it was
that an
something
example of an empty promise?
No, not at all, because we've delivered on our commitment, which is to fund it. The funding is there, the payments have been made.
But it doesn't make a difference if the workers aren't there.
I wish things were black and white as well. They're not. You can't just snap your fingers and get the workers in place. But
let's move to the gender pay gap. Mm-hmm. It is currently 12%, which is the lowest on record. Mm-hmm. Tell us, though, what the government is doing to reduce it further.
So a couple of things. I mean, one of the best things we can do is try and get the wages for women up. So we're playing a role there, particularly in those highly feminised industries like aged care, where 90% of the workforce are women. So they've had a big pay increase. So part of it's making sure wages are improving. And part of it's about, I think, flushing out what's happening particularly in the private sector about pay. I
want to talk about the highly feminised industries because, as you say, one issue is the lower pay for employees in women-dominated industries. And I've heard you say that one solution is to get more men working in those industries. How do you plan to encourage men to work in lower-paid industries?
Well, that's why we're trying to increase the pay, because it is very sensitive to pay rates when you can get a lot better pay in a lot of other work. Like, you know, if you're an early childhood educator, I spoke to somebody who left to go and work at Bunnings because they get more there. So part of it's about lifting the pay, professionalising it, but we also need to it's not just men into women's jobs, it's women into men's jobs as well. So construction, mining, all of those jobs are 90% men and 10% women. They're very well paid, but they don't often have the conditions that women feel that they can go and work in. So it's a mix of all of those things.
Women who are 55 and older are one of the fastest growing groups of homeless people in the country. Mm-hmm. What is the government doing to fix this?
Well, that's, I guess, they're at the centre of our housing agenda. So that's why our housing programs have a subset of focus on women and women with children. We pay Commonwealth rent assistance for people on low incomes as part of the income supports, and 51% of those that receive Commonwealth rent assistance are single women. Often have children, but sometimes they're not. They're single women, and it can be women over the age of 55. So we know that there's a big need there.
That deals with the symptoms of the issue, but what are you doing to address the causes of the problem?
So a couple of things there, really, trying to lift the wages of women, super, making sure women of my generation will, if they've been working, have superannuation to rely on. The age pension is there otherwise. Little things like we're doing super on PPL because we recognise that as women come in and out of the workforce, that those periods of time, you know, they call it the motherhood penalty, where you're in and out and you suffer either from, you know, lack of promotion, can't work full-time, so you work part-time, and when you're out of the paid workforce and you're basically working full-time with your children, you don't get super. So we're changing all that, and that was in the budget.
Now, Treasurer Jim Chalmers recently said it would be better if birth rates were higher, and he said that he did understand why families were having less babies. But I'm interested in your perspective as the Minister for Women and the Minister for Finance. Is Australia's declining birth rate a concern for you?
I think when you look at economic forecasts, having a birth rate that doesn't meet the replacement rate is an issue. Certainly, you'll have less people looking after older generations, and that puts a real pressure on things. But I also recognise that women's reproductive choices are their own, and there's a range of reasons why women choose to have children or choose not to have children. I guess the job for government is to make sure that those choices are real. So if you don't want to have children, that's okay. If you want to have children, that you're supported to do that, and that the government systems help you make life a bit easier when you're going through that.
If it is an issue, what is the government doing to make having a baby more attractive?
Well, I think if you look at the reasons that a lot of women, just talking with women that I have contact with, was too costly financially, it's too hard to afford to buy a house, I'm worried about climate change, the world's going crazy, why would I do that? So, I think for government, what are the things that we can help with? Well, we can try and help with housing, making sure we've got more supply. We can do things like PPL on super, so people don't feel that they're going to be financially disadvantaged. We can make sure that women are getting the opportunities that they deserve, that they can be economically independent of their partner. Those are the types of things that we can control, and maybe if you're making life a bit easier on that front, you start thinking, well, yeah, I can have another child if I want, but it's the fact that they are able to make a choice, I think, that we need to focus on.
I want to look at the idea of reproductive leave. Do you think that women should be entitled to reproductive leave?
Look, I support access to leave to allow you to do the things you need to do in your personal life. And to me, it's making sure you've got enough personal leave and that that's flexible enough to do.
But a lot of women say they don't have enough personal leave in order to take leave for reproductive reasons.
Yeah. Well, again, I think if you get into specific leave, where does it start and where does it end? And that's why personal leave has kind of been the all-encompassing thing where, it used to be sick leave, it used to be carers leave, and you've kind of put it together to say this is your general leave entitlement. But people come forward with different ideas and employers need to respond to it.
We've seen movement on the issue in Victoria and Queensland. By you saying the government wouldn't consider this at a federal level?
Well, we haven't in this last round, and we've just wrapped that up for the next 3 years. But I have no doubt that when we get into the bargaining round again, things like this will come forward.
And would you consider it?
Yeah, you consider all of those things. There's leave for menopause. I know that that's been an issue that's been put on the table. So I think all of these matters are quite rightly dealt with at the bargaining table. And I would also say that it's great that we're seeing issues of women's health being pursued through the bargaining table.
Just lastly, what do you hope that your legacy as the Minister for Women is?
I don't really think about legacies that often, partly because I'm too busy, and also I think it's a bit indulgent, to think, what will I bring to this? I feel like I'm in this privileged position. I've got a full kind of job list of to-do things that I want to get done, but that to-do list has been campaigned for from women all around the country for many, many years, and I'm just in the privileged position to try and start knocking them off one by one. And we've done quite a bit in our first 2 years. We've got more to do, but I really hope that women of your generation, at the end of the day, I guess what motivates me, women of your generation, my daughters and their daughters, will find life a bit easier and a bit better and a bit more equal and a bit more fairer than women of my generation found.
Katy Gallagher, thank you so much for joining the Daily Oz.
Thanks for having me, Billi.